Well, that's what we're starting with today on Sunrise Daily. Well, we actually do expect Senator Jibrin Barrel, but we're still hoping he can make it. But now we're joined by Mr. Moyoshere Onigbanjo, a senior advocate of Nigeria, to shed some light on this matter. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for inviting me.
About members or legislatures suspending themselves, there's always been this argument about it. We've seen it several years. We've seen it in the House of Reps. Now we've seen it again in the Senate. Does it have any basis in law, suspending their members?
Well, I recall that there was a case, I think, during the administration of President Obasanjo, where a court said that the power to suspend is very limited for, I think, about maybe 14 days or so. So I do not know where the Senate gets their own powers to suspend for 6 months. One also has to bear in mind that even if those powers exist, it is not a power that should be exercised lightly. Because, I mean, you are denying an entire section of the country from being represented, which to me overrides any other interest. That is paramount. It is not his colleagues, the senators, who appointed him as a senator. He was elected to represent an area. And to say you will deny that area the powers of representation for 6 months, to my mind, is something that ought to be challenged. The powers of suspension comes from the Senate's own internal regulations. There is no law outside those internal regulations that says a senator can be suspended. So if you check the Constitution, the Electoral Act, and what have you, you would not find any such law. But in their own internal laws and regulations or guidelines, they have the power, they inserted powers to suspend. But now, does those internal guidelines, the question should be, do those guidelines trump or override the constitutional right of citizens of this area in the state that this senator comes from to be denied of representation? Even if
the entire senators agreed to abide with that, their internal law or house rule?
Yeah. When the thing is, their internal laws cannot override duly passed legislation. So if there is a legislation that says people of Borno State, or I don't know the state that the senator comes from, Borno State, if the law says they're entitled to be represented for throughout the session of the Senate by a representative, I do not see how an internal law passed by the Senate, which is not a law, it is not legislation, it is not an act of parliament, it is just a guideline. I don't see how we can override that constitutional right given to citizens of the area in Borno State that this senator represents.
But the Senate says that this is a more lighter punishment it is given to Mr. Ndume, Senator Ndume. If it's taking this as a lighter punishment for him, what powers is vested on the Senate to go even beyond what it is doing now?
If you deny an entire section of Nigeria of representation for 6 months, then I don't know how you could describe that as being light. Because 6 months is half a year. So it means that for that period, that part of Borno State has no voice or say in whatever transpires in terms of laws being passed, in terms of oversight functions. So I do not agree that that's a lighter punishment. For example, I do not see how the Senate, if people vote for somebody to take up a seat at the Senate, I do not see how the Senate can say, okay, because you misbehaved, we're going to deny your area of representation for the rest. Let's say, if they say that is light, can they then say that they have the right to deny the people of Borno State of being represented in the Senate, for example, for the rest of the legislative term? I don't think they have those powers.
Did Ndume bring the Senate to a state of disrepute as being claimed by the senators by humiliating Dino Melaye and the Senate President? Is that true?
Well, I mean, that's subjective, really. It's subjective. I mean, because he laid a complaint that there were reports in the papers. They set up a committee to look at it. The committee, in its own wisdom, came to the conclusion that the allegations were not founded. And to now turn around and punish him in that regard, to my mind, leaves questions for people to ponder. So, I mean, if you're a complainant, says, oh, there are these allegations, and that's not, mind you, that's not the first time that we've seen them act on reports in the media. They summon people, they query, they do act on reports in the media. And so if you say this reports are unfounded, you have cleared the people being accused. Why then do you want to punish the complainant?
Speaking about them responding to reports in the media, some of the actions that Senate also took on the day was to summon Professor Sage about his comments. But he in turn has responded saying he doesn't have any business in law, they can't summon him. What do you think?
Well, I don't for 1 minute hold brief for the respected Professor Sage, SAN, but I agree with him completely. Under Section 88, which vests the Senate with the powers to summon people, they can only summon people pursuant, either they want to legislate on that item. One, they must have the powers to legislate on that item. Two, they can only summon people because they want to amend the law, or they want to enact a law to cover an area. It is not a power which is at large. They can't just summon anybody that suits their fancy. In 1983, there was a similar situation between the Senate of the National Assembly and Tony Momo, who was then, I think, editor of the Daily Times. He had written a very disparaging article about the then senators, and they were upset with him, and they summoned him, just like they've summoned Professor Sage. They summoned him to appear before them. He took them to court, challenging those summons, and the court ruled in his favor that the power to investigate or to summon is not just at large. You just don't exercise it because you want to. It must be pursuant to that you want to pass a bill or that you want to amend an existing law. So you can't just wake up and say because somebody says something that you do not agree with, you want to summon him before you just for the purpose of ridiculing him.
Okay, well, we'll take a further look at that, but Markwe has got a question. Markwe.